Sounds an awful lot like the Jim Crow that you grew up in and were born into. These proposed voting laws are remnants of Jim Crow. Black communities, Latino communities, disabled Americans, the constitutional right to vote, as was done in the past.
Now, my colleagues on the left like to say that common sense voting laws, including requiring a government-issued ID, are racist, discriminatory, and burdensome. Let me be clear. Making it to the polls to vote in person with an ID in this country today is a very low bar, extremely low bar. We can do it, white people can do it, black people can do it, Americans can do it.
Welcome back to MAGA News Central. Democrats have spent years arguing that voter ID laws are somehow modern-day Jim Crow. During this hearing, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doubled down on that argument, suggesting that election integrity measures resemble the discriminatory practices of the past. According to AOC and her allies, requiring identification to vote creates barriers for minority communities and threatens voting rights. But here's the question millions of Americans are asking. If showing identification is required for countless everyday activities, why is voting suddenly treated differently?
If anyone even studied American history, knew the work of King, knew the work and the necessity of women's rights and suffrage and Native American history in this country, they would know the importance of understanding this history in the context of present law. So let's start with a history lesson, and let's talk about Jim Crow. According to the Public Broadcasting Service, they define Jim Crow as the segregation and disenfranchisement laws known as Jim Crow represented a formal, codified system of racial apartheid. That is not a subjective definition. This is a settled definition of Jim Crow in the context of American history. Until 1966, we had apartheid in the racial apartheid, known as Jim Crow, in the United States of America. We had the normalization of white supremacist voters monitoring and intimidating black voters at polling locations during the era of Jim Crow, correct? HB 3 would set new ID requirements, so voters must provide their driver's license number, or if they don't have one, the last 4 digits of their social security or a signed affidavit, correct?
Right.
Now, they would also place a ban on the distribution of mail-in ballot applications, correct? Citizenship checks, monthly citizenship checks for voter registration, correct?
Correct.
It sounds an awful lot like the Jim Crow that you grew up in and were born into. Based on your lived experience, would you say that these proposed voting laws are remnants of Jim Crow? I shouldn't even say remnants, revivals, an attempted revival at Jim Crow? That SB 1 and HB 3 are systematic measures to impede your community, black communities, Latino communities, and wide variety, including, as Representative Presley had noted, disabled Americans, the constitutional right to vote, as was done in the past.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about voter, quote unquote, the myth of voter fraud. According to MIT Election Data and Science Lab, only about 0.00006% of total mail-in votes cast are results of voter fraud. That's less likely than being struck by lightning.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin and Ranking Member Graham, for having me here today to speak about voting rights in America, the country that I love dearly. More importantly, I'm here to talk about the left's soft bigotry of low expectations. Because it's the Democrat Party, not the Republican Party, that thinks so little of black America as a people of color that they make the case that being black in America means we can't obtain a government ID to vote. And that's not only a ridiculous assertion, it's demeaning and it's insulting. When it comes down to it, many of my colleagues on the left like to pretend that we're still living in the 1950s. Well, we're not. I've got some good news for you. It's 2024, and I know what year it is because I've been black for just over 40 years. And I'm also the son of a retired lieutenant colonel who grew up in a segregated South. You see, my parents grew up in a Jim Crow South in the 50s and 60s in New Orleans, Louisiana. Their next generation, my parents had 3 kids. My sister, brother, and I all went to West Point, all 3 of us. We all served our country in combat. And I sit before you today as a sitting United States congressman in a district in a suburb of Houston, Texas, that's a white majority district, that President Trump would have won by 25 points and I won by almost 30 points. And that doesn't happen unless we've made some incredible progress in this great nation. Now, my colleagues on the left like to say that common sense voting laws, including requiring a government-issued ID, are racist, discriminatory, and burdensome. Do you know what my father had back in the 40s and 50s before it was even cool? A government-issued ID. And continuing in his footsteps, I too have multiple government-issued IDs, and while that might be shocking to many people in this country, people may ask, how's that happen? It's very simple. It's personal responsibility for all Americans in this country, regardless of what you look like. Sitting with me today is my global entry card, my military ID card, my Texas driver's license, my Texas license to carry, because that's how we roll in Texas, my congressional card, and of course, the good old-fashioned American passport. What sorcery is this? What am I, the Black Houdini? How was I able to pull off the impossible and attain not one, not two, not three, but 6 government-issue IDs? Personal responsibility in this country. I fought for this country as an Apache helicopter pilot to protect free and fair elections, and having a government-issued ID isn't racist, it's American. You need to have an ID to drive a car, to check into the airport, open a bank account. You need an ID for basically everything to be a responsible adult in this country, except for voting, apparently, according to the left. Black America does not need well-meaning liberals putting their arms around us and telling us how we should go to the polls. In fact, if you look at recent headlines and polls, you will find that black men specifically in this country are more fired up than ever to participate in the next presidential election. And I think I know why, and I'm really looking forward to these results. For the record, in the 2022 midterms in Georgia, it proved that election integrity and ballot accessibility can be achieved hand in hand. After the 2020 election, Georgia passed a voter election integrity law, and subsequently, the Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against the state of Georgia alleging that the Georgia law is discriminatory and aims to restrict citizens from voting. President Biden even called this law, and I quote, Jim Crow 2.0. Really? In my humble opinion, referencing Jim Crow for common sense election integrity laws is offensive to those who actually experienced Jim Crow, like my parents and their parents before them. In fact, the law wasn't discriminatory at all, because in the 2022 midterms, Georgia voters shattered voter turnout records across the state. And despite that record-breaking turnout in Georgia, the DOJ lawsuit is still pending. I suspect that it's because that record-breaking turnout resulted in a Republican governor being elected in Georgia, but I digress. I'm going to say the quiet part out loud, which I tend to do. I have a lot of respect for John Lewis, but the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is not about protecting voting rights. It's about solidifying Democrat power nationally. It's about federal control over state and local elections, which, by the way, is unconstitutional. It's about diminishing the security of our elections. And voter integrity laws aren't discriminatory. They are required for a functioning constitutional republic. I'm going to tell you today, I categorically reject the soft bigotry of low expectations. Black Americans and people of color are proud. We expect more of ourselves. That's what Black excellence really means to me. And above all else, we don't need a new solution to a problem that doesn't exist. Let me be clear. Making it to the polls to vote in person with an ID in this country today is a very low bar, extremely low bar. We can do it, white people can do it, black people can do it, Americans can do it. And we should all want that for free and fair elections. If you want to be on the right side of history, you should reject the Democrats' party's attempt to wind the clock back 70 years. Because I'm sitting right here in front of you, and I'm here to tell you we've come a long way. Let's continue this progress. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, sir, for having me.
Thank you, Congressman.
That question hung over the entire hearing, and then Congressman Wesley Hunt stepped in. What happened next completely changed the conversation. Instead of accepting the premise that voter ID laws are discriminatory, Hunt challenged the foundation of the argument itself. Hunt argued that Democrats are promoting what he called the soft bigotry of low expectations by suggesting minority Americans are somehow less capable of obtaining identification than everyone else. And Hunt wasn't speaking as an outsider looking in. He spoke as the son of parents who lived through segregation in the South. He spoke as a combat veteran. He spoke as a black congressman representing a district that repeatedly votes Republican. His message was straightforward. America has made tremendous progress, and comparing modern voter ID requirements to Jim Crow diminishes the suffering of those who actually endured that era. That point clearly landed, because suddenly the discussion wasn't about voter ID anymore. It became about whether Democrats were using one of America's darkest chapters as a political weapon. The most powerful part of Hunt's testimony wasn't a statistic, it was a challenge. Hunt listed the many forms of identification Americans routinely use to function in everyday life. Driver's licenses, passports, military IDs, banking documents, travel credentials. His question was simple. If Americans are trusted to provide identification for all these responsibilities, why are voters supposedly incapable of doing the same at the ballot box? It's a question that supporters of voter ID laws have been asking for years. And during this hearing, Democrats struggled to provide an answer that resonated beyond their political base. For many viewers, Hunt exposed what they see as a contradiction in the left's argument. This exchange wasn't just another congressional debate. It highlighted a growing divide in American politics. One side argues that voter ID protects election integrity and strengthens public confidence. The other argues that such requirements create barriers for some voters. But what made this hearing stand out was Hunt's ability to challenge the narrative using his own life story and personal experience. Whether you agree with him or not, he forced the conversation onto ground where many Democrats appeared uncomfortable defending their assumptions. And that's exactly why this moment is spreading across social media. Not because it was loud, not because it was dramatic, but because it raised a question that millions of Americans are still debating today. What do you think? Should voter ID be required nationwide for federal elections? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for MAGA News Central.